manager where I manage oncology studies. As far as my educational background, I have an MPA from the College of Brockport here in Rochester, New York, and a BA from Columbia University in New York City. In terms of industry accomplishments, as I mentioned, I was a project manager for two COVID trials that received FDA approval. So one of the things I'm really proud about. I'm also proud about my diverse ethnic background, as I'm both Indian and Puerto Rican, and I'm also a proud dad, as you can see in the picture there with my daughter. Next slide. So essentially, how did I get into clinical research? So I'll give everyone on the call some context, historical context. After I graduated from college, I worked in legal services for a few years. Then I transitioned into law enforcement, where I was a police officer in New York City for nearly 4 years. So everyone, you might ask yourself, how did someone who was a police officer end up transitioning into clinical research? And just some history here. Background. My wife and I, we did this crazy thing where we decided to move to a new city where we didn't really know anyone. We both grew up in New York City, and I was looking to transition to outside of the police department by going one back to school and starting a career in healthcare, because I knew that's where a lot of jobs were. So we moved to Rochester, New York, which people hear New York and they think it's close to New York City, but it's actually pretty far. It's 6 hours away from New York City, closer to Canada than I am to New York City. Um, and when I started here in Rochester, I worked as a service coordinator for a nonprofit where I was linking individuals with intellectual disabilities with resources that they needed. And I worked in this capacity for a few months. Decided I really needed to make a good living. So my wife actually came across an associate project manager role at a small imaging CRO in Rochester. I read the job description. It sounded appealing. At a theoretical level, I understood what clinical trials were, but I didn't know the details of what that really meant until I actually started doing the work. But the skill sets that they had in the job description aligned with mine. So I applied, and the rest is pretty much history, as they say. I will say that there were some advantages that I had when I applied, um, and I wanted to highlight. Number one, it was a very small imaging CRO, and two, I was pursuing grad school public administration with a concentration in healthcare management. So I was able to use that as a talking point during my interviews, where I was able to draw comparisons between the coursework that I was taking and matching that with the day-to-day activities that would be expected. Um, I would be expected to perform in a project management role. So what do I like about clinical research? I find clinical trials are complex. There are a lot of moving parts, um, a lot of variables in each trial. No two trials are the same. And personally, I find it to be exciting, rewarding. I get the chance to work with people from all over the world, and you're part of something that is concerned with human progress, which is a very, I think, very meaningful thing. So next slide, please. So we'll talk about the industry. I think we can jump to the next slide. Thank you, Hector. The industry is very highly regulated. There's a lot of training involved. It is considered a niche area within the healthcare. Um, Not many people know that there are a lot of job opportunities available in clinical trials. I would say the most common misperception is that all clinical research jobs consist of individuals who are working in a lab, right, to develop a compound, or they're writing academic peer-reviewed paper. But there's essentially a lot more to it than that. As a whole, it's an actual industry with many different positions that are as wide and varied as it can get, which I'll talk about soon. If you're someone that's interested in supporting clinical trials, working in the space outside of the lab and the clinic, then it is worth exploring careers at contract research organizations, which are called CROs. And in large part, CROs are the beneficiaries of the pharma and the biotech companies who outsource their work to them. Um, and to make everyone aware on the call, one of the fastest growing careers in clinical research is not in the lab. It's actually in the roles that are needed to conduct the study from when the study starts until the study actually finishes. And the umbrella term for those roles, they all fit under what's called clinical operations. And clinical operations refers to all of the activities needed to support clinical trials from the clinical trial process, from when the study starts, as I mentioned, until it finishes. It's concerned with planning, management, and the overall execution of the trial. Essentially, without clinical operations, many studies wouldn't even start. They wouldn't even be able to function. And the good news is that there's a high demand for clinical operations positions with a lot of growth opportunities at CROs, which I'll talk about later when we go over specific roles. I think we can jump to the next slide. I just wanted to cover, kind of an important topic. Some of you may be wondering, how the industry is impacted right now by all of the tech layoffs that you're hearing in the news, and the global recession that is predicted for next year. I'm obviously not an economist, but I can speak about what I know is happening in clinical research. So, what is the status of, kind of layoffs or at the top pharma companies? Well, 2 days ago, Novartis, they're a big pharma company, announced some layoffs, but I haven't heard of any other pharma companies who have announced layoffs. And for the global CROs, I haven't heard or read of any layoffs. And in fact, they're still actively hiring and recruiting. Um, I would say global CROs, that partnered with sponsors who, to conduct the COVID trials, they're actually coming off of record high years in terms of revenue. So definitely a lot of opportunities at CROs. Um, what the audience here should keep in mind, I will say, is biotechs, right? Biotech companies are more volatile than pharma and CROs. They are subject to layoffs, especially those kind of early stage biotech companies where they really only have one or two assets in their portfolio. And just in case, I think some of you might be new to hearing about clinical research. You might be wondering what is the difference between kind of like a pharma company and a biotech. Essentially, pharma companies are medium to large size organizations, whereas, excuse me, biotechs are small startups. And in terms of financing, pharma companies are typically they're financed by shareholders, and the biotechs are funded by private investors. And just to kind of backtrack here, in terms of the impact of the predicted global recession, sponsors and CROs will see less funding for early phase studies. But and sponsors will reconsider which therapeutic areas they want to prioritize and which assets they want to develop over others. Next slide, please. We can jump to the next one. I'll talk about roles that are available at CROs. I'll start off with project managers. I'm obviously a project manager. Um, so if you're a project manager at a CRO, the sponsors are the clients. Um, it's a customer facing role with the project manager being the primary point of contact between the CRO and the sponsor. And ultimately, project managers are accountable for the overall success of the project. For sponsors and CROs, they care about, did you hit the agreed upon timelines that were defined in the contract? Did we stay within budget? Were study activities conducted in accordance with the study protocol and the regulatory requirements that are set forth? And part of being a project manager is also being able to pivot very quickly if sponsors change timelines. You have to be able to be very flexible with them. And essentially, if I had to create an example of what a project manager is, I would say that you should picture the person who is leading the orchestra, because for global studies, project manager is managing a large team, big team, and everyone essentially needs to work in unison. And for those large global studies, you could be managing trials with sites from various regions throughout the world, team members who are also working in different countries. And as a project manager, you're also constantly reassessing your resources, who's assigned to the study, and depending on kind of where you are in the study life cycle. Another kind of key feature of a project manager is managing the financial status of the project. Project managers are responsible for billing and forecasting on a monthly cadence. They oversee some financial reconciliations for any vendors that you're contracted to work with. And to some degree, project managers are also involved in overseeing the payments that are issued to the research sites. And for any out-of-scope work, project managers are also responsible for initiating change orders to the contract. Also, a project manager wouldn't be a project manager if he or she didn't lead or present at various internal and sponsor-facing meetings. And some examples of meetings that the project manager could be presenting at would be what's called an investigator meeting. This is a meeting done before the trial begins. You'll speak at a bid defense for any studies that could be awarded to the CRO where you're presented as a potential project manager. You'll meet with data management to prepare to lock the clinical database. You'll present to executive leadership on project status, financial metrics, risk mitigations, things of that nature. And as far as kind of the skill sets needed to be a good project manager, I would say attention to detail, being highly organized. Those are really good skills to have. Being an effective communicator is that's a big thing because PMs are required to liaison with other leaders in the drug development process. So having that ability to work cross-functionally, across teams, across departments, and follow up pretty quickly on important kind of items helps you to smoothly have a cohesive team when you're leading them. Building relationships is another important kind of skill set to have. Being in a client-facing role, you have to constantly nurture the relationship with the sponsor, be open, flexible, transparent with them about expectations. Internally, instilling trust is also a big thing. Instilling trust in the team. Personally, I like to get to know each person who I'm working with on my team, even if it's a large team. I believe it builds good morale. The team will feel empowered, and it creates a sense of trust when you listen to them and you find solutions if they raise any concerns. Next slide. Next position is associate project manager, which at some CROs is used interchangeably with project specialist, project management assistant. Those are kind of the different names or titles that you would come across. And if any of you have seen or familiar with Batman and Robin, I would classify the PM as Batman and the associate project manager as Robin. Essentially, the associate project manager is primarily responsible for providing support to the project manager wherever he or she may need some additional support. Associate project manager could be tasked with, for example, pulling reports for the project managers, maintaining a project files, taking meeting minutes, tracking who has and hasn't completed protocol training, updating the clinical trial management system, following up with team members on pending items that they need to resolve. And the responsibilities of an associate project manager, they do expand if you express interest and excel in that role in order to eventually become a project manager. Next slide. So clinical trial managers, often referred to as CTMs. You might be thinking, and this was something that I didn't know until a few years ago, before I started working. I didn't know this until I started working at global CROs, but you might be thinking that the titles of a project manager and clinical trial manager, they obviously sound very similar, but they're different positions. CTMs are involved in the training, startup, and the management of sites. They serve as a point of escalation for communication with the sites. That's and this is a key difference between the PM role and the CTM role, in that CTMs have frequent contact with the research sites, whereas the project manager, he or she is not really expected to have much contact with the sites. CTMs, they also manage a team of CRAs. CRAs are referred to as clinical research associates. And CTMs also play a pivotal role during site activation. Basically, what that means is before a site can participate in a trial, they have to go through several steps to make sure to get them ready, right? To make sure that the site is ready to be activated and participate in a trial. CTMs are involved in this process because they have to ensure that the CRAs are prepared to perform what's called an SIV, which is a site initiation visit, and they have oversight over that. During this visit, the CRAs will train the sites on the protocol, which is required before they can even screen or enroll patients. CTMs are also involved in the preparation to lock the clinical database. Some of you might be wondering, what a database lock is. And what that means is before the clinical trial, what that means is all the clinical trials data has to be collected for all patients, and information has to be deemed complete and accurate with no discrepancies. CTMs, they also have oversight of the monitoring activities that are conducted by CRAs. They review and approve of trip reports that are submitted by them for each of their routine monitoring visits. CTMs, they also manage aspects of the closeout visits. When a study starts, there's an end date. Sites also have to be closed. And that typically occurs when patients are no longer receiving the investigational treatment and the database has been locked. So I'll mention that, some experience that CROs look for in CTMs, they look for prior site management or some sort of site level experience. And if you have CRA experience as well, or that is a big plus that they look for in the role. Next slide. So it's going to segue into CRAs. As I mentioned, CRAs are referred to as clinical, or their job title is clinical research associate. In the industry, they're called CRAs. They are the point of escalation. I'm sorry, they are the CRO point of contact for the sites. CRAs, some of you may know this, they're in very high demand. The travel demands also for CRAs is very high. CRAs are primarily traveling between research sites to ensure that all sites are conducting the trial in accordance with the protocol. CRAs are often tasked with confirming that the principal investigator is the medical doctor who's overseeing the trial, and the study coordinators understand the adverse event reporting requirements. So those are things that the CRA will go over with them. CRAs will visit the sites that they are assigned to at least every 6 to 8 weeks. That's depending on the therapeutic area, the monitoring strategy set forth for the study, timelines, things of that nature. But typically, you see about 6 to 8 weeks monitoring frequency per site. During those visits, the CRA reviews what's called the investigator site file. That contains essential documents showing that both the principal investigator and other site staff have followed the regulatory requirements set forth. CRAs, they'll be tasked with finding discrepancies between study documents and the clinical database. CRAs will also make sure that every patient who's enrolled in the trial has signed a consent form. That is very important. If a CRA notes any discrepancies during their visits, they typically will generate a query or queries within the EDC system, which is called the electronic data capture. One of, I would say, the key objectives of a CRA is also to provide that quality assurance that the sponsors are looking for, and that's really needed in a clinical trial. CRAs do this by completing what's called source data verification and source data review during these routine monitoring visits. Essentially, with that, SDV or source data verification, what that means is they're essentially comparing the recorded data against source documents to ensure that there is a match, whereas the purpose of source document review is to ensure that the quality of the source document itself. And a source document could be anything from data, document, or record that's created, collected as a first point of data entry during the clinical trial. And I will say that oncology experience as a CRA is highly valued, highly coveted, and those tend to be the highest paying in the industry. And for oncology studies, principal investigators are heavily involved in clinical trials. As you can imagine, there's a lot of data to review since the patients are unfortunately sick. So there are typically more adverse events, more medical logs to review. So as a CRA, you'll be pretty busy in the oncology therapeutic area. And for those of you who are on the call who are interested in becoming a CRA, having a degree in the life sciences is a good start. Although it's preferred, but it's not really required. Being a clinical research coordinator is something that a lot of CROs do look for, and some CROs, they have what's called a CRA Academy, and those academies will kind of prep you to be a CRA. Within that, they'll train you, and after, you'll get your start as either a CRA1 or an in-house CRA, which is the next role that I'll go over. Thank you. So in-house CRA, as I mentioned, some CROs, they have a CRA training program. After the training program, if you are placed as an in-house CRA, they'll bring you up to speed within roughly 6 months to get you ready to be a traveling CRA. And within the role as an in-house CRA, you'll be working from home, and some of those traveling CRAs, they'll often delegate remote work to you. As an in-house CRA, you may be requested to pull regulatory documents, help resolve some vendor issues, order clinical supplies for the sites, assist in site payments, and track the patient visits. Those are some of overall activities that you would be expected to perform that would be delegated to you by the traveling CRAs. And some CROs are pretty desperate for CRAs, and that's due to simply supply and demand ratio. There's a high demand and not really enough supply of CRAs. Therefore, they will let you do, as an in-house CRA, some remote monitoring from home. So in that regard, you'll gain good monitoring experience to help you become a CRA, which is a good deal. If you're looking also for an entry-level role without any travel expectations. And as I mentioned, typically, within 6 months, they'll fast track you as an in-house CRA and promote you to the CRA role within kind of about six months or so. Clinical trial assistants, that's another role. For those of you who have, applied to a CRA academy or in-house CRA roles without, any success, another option for you to consider and pursue is the clinical trial assistant role. It's a good entry-level role into the field to eventually make that next step to in-house CRA. If you're fresh out of college, and you want to get into project management, but you don't have project management experience, whether that's in a different industry or you just don't have project management experience just in general, then the CTA role is definitely worth exploring. And what the CTAs provide is administrative support for the entire study team at the CRO. They'll be assisting, with updating the clinical system, tracking site compliance and performance. So overall, it's a first level kind of entry level position to help get your foot in the door at a CRO. It's good if you're fresh out of college, you don't have any experience in the field. You've tried, to come in-house CRA, and you haven't had much success there. It's worth thinking about a CTA role. And if you'd like to get into project management, or as I mentioned, become a CRA, it's a good role to consider the CTA role. Next slide, please. All right, so the last role that I'll cover here is the study startup specialist, and within the CRO, study startup is referred to as SSU. A lot of kind of short abbreviations here that you'll learn from. The team is basically divided into two divisions: the regulatory and contracts department. And for regulatory, they are concerned with getting the sites ready to be activated. So they will review documents. It could be like financial disclosures forms, medical licenses, lab certifications, and the informed consent document. So they'll have to submit those documents and a lot of other ones to the institutional review board called the IRB and the ethics committee for approval so the research sites can participate in the trial. And the second department within SSU is called contracts. They are responsible for initiating the initial contract negotiations with the research sites. And before a site can even participate in a clinical research trial, a fully executed contract is required. Some of the career progressions, if you're kind of interested in the study startup, in terms of career progression, study startup specialists can eventually move up to become a regulatory lead, where they'll oversee kind of like a team of SSU specialists from different regions. For those who also have an interest in becoming a project manager or any position within project management, the roles within study startup can help you get into project management. I've seen that happen numerous times as well. Or as another avenue to pursue would be going through the study startup division. Next slide, please. So there's quite a bit of roles that I have listed here. I won't go over all the roles in detail. This is kind of like a snippet of the positions: clinical data manager, clinical data associate. They have positions within programming, stats. You can work as a business analyst, an investigator payment specialist, where you're supporting the sites with payments, invoicing, reviewing and approving payments, reviewing their contracts. You can work as a finance analyst. You can work in business development. You can work also as a trial master file lead or document specialist, medical writer. You can work within IT, quality assurance, within billing called accounts payable. You can focus on vendor management as a vendor manager, where you work with basically different vendors who the CRO is contracted to work with. It could be like a central lab. That's an example of one vendor that you could potentially work with. and decentralized trials. A lot of the global CROs, there's a lot of initiative, push, and drive put forward to grow decentralized trials, and a lot of that is tied into, also increasing diversity within clinical trials. Decentralized trials, they help with, recruitment, where you're able to, perhaps even bring what's called, home health nurse to do a simple blood draw, where someone doesn't need to go to a research site, if it's a long travel distance for them. So it helps to increase participation for those, who live in even rural areas. It helps attract more of a diverse population, and it's something that a lot of CROs are really investing a lot of money into. And I'll kind of pause right there. If anyone wants to kind of take a screenshot of that, you can. I know, Hector, you're going to be, yeah, I think you're going to be sharing this presentation with everyone after the meeting. So I think we can jump to the next slide here and talk about some career tips before we kind of get into Q&A. And these are some tips that I've, shared with those, share that has worked for me personally, and also for others that, that I've mentored. So I'll start off with seeks in clinical research. I encourage everyone on the call, and those of you who might, eventually listen to the recording, to join the community, the Seeks in Clinical Research. And the purpose of Seeks in Clinical Research is to bring awareness, to bring guidance to the Seek community, to help start and grow your careers within clinical research, and to increase our representation, which is really important. And besides, kind of working at a CRO, some of you who might have an entrepreneurial spirit, you can even work towards, becoming an owner of a research clinic. There are many options available to you in this industry. And ECTA, she can help provide, ECTA and her team can help provide you with giving you that knowledge base, helping you to establish connections in the industry, to help get you started and to help you grow within your careers. And ECTA and her team have, they've also published articles, books. They post job alerts. They've hosted community events to attract students and even seasoned professionals to this field. So I recommend that you all follow Seeks in Clinical Research on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok for the latest updates. And admittedly, I don't know too much about TikTok or Snapchat. I can't tell you the differences between the two. I primarily use LinkedIn. But again, those are different social media platforms that are, you'll see Seeks in Clinical Research involved in. So I definitely encourage you all to become a member, join the community, and ECTA does provide the team, the members with these monthly meetups where you'll have different speakers across clinical trials. You might have someone who's at the site level CRO speaking to you about their experiences and how to kind of get involved and learn about the career. Another thing that I would mention is to familiarize yourself with the industry. That goes hand in hand with Seeks in Clinical Research. There are also some additional sources to help you understand different trends within different companies, organizations within the clinical trial space. I recommend that you read articles on what's Fierce Pharma. They publish really good content. There's some other resources such as Applied Clinical Trials, Pharma Voice, Endpoint News. Definitely good sources to utilize. I also suggest learning vocabulary that is specific to clinical trials. And I recommend ECTA's book entitled Clinical Research Heroes, Learn the Glossary of Research. And although the target audience is children, if you want to become familiar with basic terminology in clinical trials, her book is definitely does a good job of explaining them to you. So I recommend her book to kind of learn some of the lingo and vocabulary there. Also, take a look at clinicaltrials.gov to find the most kind of common assessments that are in clinical research. If you'd like to become a CRA, You can study the top conditions in a given therapeutic area, find out what are some common treatments for those conditions. I also recommend that you speak to as many people as possible in the industry. You want to understand, to help you to understand the kind of the market value of the roles that you're considering. Talk to many recruiters and talk to many clinical research professionals, clinical operations professionals, to kind of gain that intelligence about the market trends. And if you've achieved, quantifiable successes in any of your previous or current roles, you should definitely highlight them. Make sure you mention them when you interview. Develop what's called a brag sheet. Most often, a lot of us, we do a lot more in our day to day than we give ourselves credit for. So make sure you really highlight and illustrate those things when you're interviewing. I have a link here on the slide deck embedded. It's a podcast from our career coach. Her name's Letitia Bird, where she goes over free examples of brag sheets, really good content on her platform, a lot of free examples provided, and apply to roles that interest you, even if you have less experience than what's listed in the job description. Even if you don't have direct experience, think about what skills you possess that are transferable to this industry, and make sure that you highlight them in your resume and when you're speaking to recruiters or hiring managers during your interviews. I think we can jump to the next slide here. And before we kind of jump into the Q&A, for those of you who have any questions, even after the presentation concludes, feel free to reach out to me via LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is included here. I've also included a link to the careers page here at Syneos Health, which is where I work, and you can browse through job openings. For those of you who you have your resume and you'd like someone to review it, by all means you can send it my way. I'm more than open to reviewing your resume, sharing some tips with you. And with that being said, I know we have about 16 minutes or so. I guess we can start to open it up for some Q&A.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Amrit. So very, very informational. And I like the way you presented it and you took time on each slide and on each position explained, what the position looks like and what skills they need to have to apply for, different positions. So very nice. So yes, so I know we are short of time, so we can start taking questions. So guys, go ahead and ask your questions.